Right, good morning everybody. It is 10 o'clock. I would like us to commence if that's okay. So first of all, welcome to this meeting of Thirsk and Malton Area Planning Committee. Today's meeting is being recorded and filmed and will be made publicly available on the website, so access is available to a wider audience. In accordance with usual practice at meetings held in public, I look forward to a respectful debate. Only those members of the public who have registered to speak may do so, and they have 5 minutes to present their case. I will call on you to speak at the appropriate time on the agenda. No late notifications, I have to say, would be accepted, and I don't think we've had any. So, and no one can speak without giving the due notice. Please ensure that your mobile phones are switched off or on silent. Toilets are located down in the corridor. I've not been made aware that we are expecting a fire alarm this morning, so if it does sound, please leave the building with the nearest emergency exit and gather in the car park at the front of the offices. That's the housekeeping things done, I think. Nikki, have we got any apologies for absence, please? Thank you. Minutes for the meeting held on the 18th of December. And this is just for accuracy. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes from the 18th of December? No. Could I have a, you weren't here. Can I have a proposal? Oh. Was there only 3 of us? How do we do that then? Because we're not. Okay, you check. I'll leave that one there. Right, I'll come back to that one in a minute. We're just checking the constitution because there's only 2 of us here. Declarations of interest. Has anybody got any declarations of interest, please? Councillor Andrews.
It's not a declaration of interest. It's just I've been lobbied on this one. Thank you.
I need to declare as well that I have been lobbied, but not given it a great deal of weight. So sorry. We've got before us application number ZE25/00703 It's the erection of a dwelling and associated works and infrastructure at Garforth Hall Cottage, Ryton Rig Road, Ryton, North Yorkshire. And we do have some speakers on this matter. We have got the parish council chairman, the divisional member and the applicant, and I'll call you when we're ready to hear from you. Ash, do you want to present your report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Before we begin with the presentation, can I draw your attention to the updates list, which includes minor amendment to the site history in the report and 3 additional public comments in support of the application. A further 3 documents were submitted since publication of the updates by Councillor Mason, and these relate to the evidence around the demolition of the building. So coming to the presentation, this is a full application for the construction of a single dwelling and associated works and infrastructure at Garforth Hall Cottage near Ryton. There is a discrepancy in the address, as this property is also known as Garforth Hall Cottage. However, the application paperwork has proceeded on the basis of what was provided on the application form, and the site is in any case identified adequately by the location plan. As noted in the report, the application has been called to committee on the request of a member. The application site is located on the north side of Ryton Rig Road to the southeast of Great Hampton, which can be seen at the top left of the satellite image. Next slide, please. The site is bordered to the south by hedgerow, but otherwise the site is currently quite open and bordered by open countryside. As can be seen from the aerial view, a site access and partial track have been constructed off Ryton Road. Next slide, please. In this case, I think it makes more sense to present the case in chronological order so that an understanding of the site history and how officers have reached the recommendation can be gained. So in 2021, permission was granted for the renovation of the former cottage, as shown on the screen, including re-roofing, installation of timber windows and doors and stonework, repairs to form 1 3-bedroom dwelling and associated parking and landscaping. In 2022, a fresh application was submitted for the demolition of the existing building and the erection of 1 3-bedroom dwelling and detached double garage. This application was withdrawn following advice from officers that the application could not be supported. In summary, the main issue was that the renovation of the building and the change of use from abandoned back to a dwelling was supportable under policy SP2, which allows for the conversion of redundant or disused traditional rural buildings. It was explained that the retention of the building, which was identified as a non-designated heritage asset, was given weight in the previous decision, and that the removal of the building would therefore result in the loss of the principle of development. In 2023, a further application for the renovation of the building was approved, allowing for the raising of the roof to allow first floor accommodation and single-storey extension to the rear. And can I have the next slide, please? So these last two photos show the building as it stood during this time. Next slide, please. This slide shows the approved drawings for the most recent renovation permission. Next slide, please. And the approved floor plan. In 2024, an enforcement officer visited the site and found that the building had been demolished and that new foundations and walling were under construction. Next slide, please. Work on site subsequently ceased and the current application was submitted in June 25 for the erection of a dwelling and associated works and infrastructure. Next slide, please. In terms of the current proposal, the plans are generally the same as what was approved under the most recent renovation permission. Here we can see the wider layout of the site with the package treatment plant to the northern end of the site. Next slide, please. And more zoomed in layout showing access, driveway, parking and gardens. The elevation drawings show the raised roof and single-storey elements to the rear. And finally, the proposed plans show 1 bedroom, shower room and dressing room on the first floor with 2 further bedrooms, bathroom, kitchen, living and dining rooms to the ground floor. So overall, the design and impact of the proposal is acceptable as it reflects previously approved plans. The main issue is, however, that the principle of development at this site has been lost. Local and national policies both require that isolated dwellings in the countryside should be avoided except in exceptional prescribed circumstances. Unfortunately, in this case, the applicants who had already been advised of the issue demolished the building, and therefore there are no policies which support a new dwelling in this location. As outlined in the report, the conservation officers indicated that there is no heritage benefit in rebuilding the cottage at this stage. And as such, given that the principle of development has fallen away and the lack of policy support for a new dwelling in this unsustainable location, the application is recommended for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right. I'm going to call the public speakers. Councillor Gardner, would you like to come forward, please? Yes, please. Green button in front of you, sir. Thank you.
I won't need 5 minutes. So this is, I'm speaking on behalf of Hampton Parish Council. The principle of development has been established by the existence of previous dwelling and the fact that the application is to replace that dwelling. The works approved in the previous consent were commenced by the demolition of the previous dwelling. The previous permission has therefore been implemented. The previous permission required the front wall to be retained. Unfortunately, it had to come down as it became unstable after a tree had been removed. The application cannot therefore be considered as an application for a new build development, but as an application or request to substitute or amend revised plans for a plan previously approved. The Rydale area no longer has a 5-year supply of houses. The Rydale plan therefore carries very little weight, but the council's reasons for refusal seek to apply the policies of the Rydale plan as if it had been the same weight as they might have been if there had been a 5-year housing supply. This is contrary to national policy. The site is in a sustainable location. The site fronts Wrighton Rig Road, and there is no highways objection or any objection from any statutory consultee. Hampton Parish Council supports the application. In the circumstances, the presumption in favour of the sustainable development should apply and planning permission should be granted.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Chair. I suspect he might hear the same story coming through here. I was going to sort of wrap up what the applicant said, but I think I'll just go with what I've written here. I want to pose a thought here, and I want to question the rationale of why we actually sat here in the first place on this one. Having read the report again and again, I struggle to understand why this is actually concluding refusal, apart from some very small semantic point that's been put forward by the conservation officer. So, firstly, the council has already accepted the principle of a 3-bedroom dwelling on this site twice, I think is correct, and they find the location sustainable. The current proposal uses the same design and footprint as the approval was granted in 24. This is not a new development as the definition of rising from a greenfield site. It's simply reinstating what has repeatedly been judged acceptable in line with the wider heritage of the site, i.e. landscape. In any development, safety is paramount. And I think this is the key point here. Due process was followed in this respect. And that's why I asked for this correspondence to be sent to you, because the applicant has followed due process and advice from health and safety for the safety of the workers on the site. The structure was deemed unsafe, and it was only found out after they got into there, because my kids used to play here. It was known as the haunted house. And there was a tree literally growing through the house. You know, so to remove that tree, it probably would have just fallen down. And I'm lucky it didn't fall on my kids, to be honest. But you know, I'm loath to also use the developer's argument that we don't have much housing land supply either on this situation. This is the house that's ready to be built. It's not going to cause much controversy at all. I don't like using that because it's being used by a lot of developers, but I do think that needs to be taken into account in this case here. As I said, the original application found this to be sustainable. And I don't understand why this application, where it is pretty much the same application, is being rebuilt. I understand that, using the existing, the old stonework. From what I understand, the significance of the build that was going on to the house was contributing a new build anyway. So the conservation officer's points about not being able to build the house to the same standard as what it would have been doesn't make any sense, because they were building half the house was going to be a new build anyway. So I don't understand some of this logic going on here. And I really want to really think about, I think this is the common sense. This is why I called it in. This is the common sense approach here. We have an applicant that has fallen foul to what's essentially problems with the building that wouldn't have been found until they got into the building. They followed advice here. We have an application that was approved. The final outcome of this application will be a house that's in that landscape that's been stood there for 200 years, and even in the report it says, you know, the gap is now in the landscape that needs to be filled. And you know, I think the community wants this to happen. All the emails you've had are from neighbours in the area, the parish council supporting, I'm supporting, and I think generally this is a situation where I think common sense must prevail on this one, and respect to the applicant for trying to bring back. He's a brave man trying to bring back this house in the first place. You know, it was in a bad state, and I think just putting it back there as a replica, I think we're in a bit of a semantic argument here, and I think we need to make a decision accordingly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bulmer. I think the microphone is on. You've got 5 minutes, Mr. Bulmer, to present your case.
Cool.
Thank you
very much. Thank you. Yeah, good morning, Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Jonathan Bulmer. I'm the applicant for this application before us today. I've lived in Rydal all my life, nearly 60 years, and the property was previously owned by my father's uncle and auntie, and I've seen it through my lifetime where it was you know, people living in it and bringing up a young family, and eventually, because falling into disrepair and allowed to fall into disrepair. And when the property came up for sale in 2020, we were very keen to buy it and to bring it back to life, and we also bought some surrounding farmland at the same time. And we bought the property not to sell it. We know if we were lucky enough to be able to rebuild it, you know, it's not as if we're building it for profit or to sell. It'll be for the family or a farm worker to live in, to bring a family up. I think it's a beautiful location, and you know, it should, you know, it should be allowed. Sorry, yeah. So we, you know, as we said, we got the planning to build the house in 2024, and obviously very disappointed when we came across the issues that we came across. During the initial site clearance, obviously we found that the building was unsafe and the welfare of the builders on site was at risk, and as previously mentioned, there was a tree growing through the middle of the house. Once the tree was removed, it's in your previous reports, but it was unsafe to carry on work on the site and to build it back at a high standard. As part of the application, we submitted letters from the builder, structural engineer and the health and safety consultant, all confirming the cottage was unsafe to work on. We did not take the decision to demolish the building lightly, and had no intention of doing so when we set out to do this project. The application before you today is basically an application to rebuild the cottage using the salvage materials which are on site, have not been removed. The proposed application drawings are in effect the previously approved plans. The foundations of the proposed dwelling are in situ and location on the same footprint as the demolished cottage. If granted approval, the new house would just look like the cottage that was demolished and is in previous planning. The application was well received locally, as which we have had some letters from a sample of local people. There's no objections that I'm aware of, and every time locally we go in the local pub, people are always asking what's happening, why is it not being rebuilt? It's been, you know, they're obviously concerned about it. The 3 letters you got in, one was from Kate Patmore, who lives down the road, Keith Richardson, who's lived in the area for 75 of his 77 years, and the Pycocks, who live just on the road from there. I think that's previously been said before, the planning officer stated that proposed house is acceptable in terms of landscape impact and residential amenity and flood risk. The case our planning agent put forward was that the rebuilding of the cottage was in practical terms a replacement dwelling, and that the lack of the 5-year housing supply weighed in our favour. You will of course come to your own view. I would reiterate that we did not set out to demolish this cottage, but our hand was forced by the condition of the building that we came across, and we have engaged fully with the planning team through the pre-application process at this application. We stopped work once we were notified by the planning officer, and we did not carry on. Ironically, when Kevin Riley came to visit ourselves, he said that if we'd gone up a couple more courses, or 3 or 4 more courses, he wouldn't have proposed that we stop work and the cottage would have been allowed to be developed. And that is not myself. Killian and my wife were at that meeting at the same time. Summing it up, really, I would just respectfully request that you approve this application this morning and allow us to refinish building the cottage. You know, I'm passionate about Rydale. Sorry? Okay, thank you. I'm passionate about Rydale. Everything we do in the area, we do a good job of it and finish it and do it properly. You would only have to look at the farm we live on and one of our other farms that we're totally renovating, and we just ask you to approve this, please. Thank you. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much. Ash, any comments?
So I suppose working backwards, discussion with officers on site is not recorded, so I can't verify whether an officer said this to the applicant or not. There's mention of rebuilding using the materials from the original dwelling. In terms of heritage, the value in rebuilding a heritage asset, be it non-designated in this case, is putting it back piece by piece. It's carefully catalogued and it's done in a really meticulous way. The conservation officer has already indicated that there's no value in this case of rebuilding it in this way, and I don't think that would actually be possible. The conservation officer mentioned that there's patina in the stone or brickwork that can't be replicated by a rebuild in this case, given how far it's come now. In terms of the landscape impact, I wouldn't say there's a gap that needs to be filled. The officer has actually been quite generous in the landscape assessment here, because in many cases we would start from the existing status of the site, which at the moment is undeveloped. But in the report, you'll see that the officer has said that actually we'll take the existence of the cottage previously into account, and has gone from that point as opposed to the existing undeveloped state. There was mention that the applicant has followed safety advice that was given to them on site during the build, and my query to that would be, was there any planning advice sought about what the position would be if they were to demolish the dwelling, and why was the council not contacted in the meantime? It was mentioned as well that the principle has been accepted, which is in a way correct, but also was accepted in different terms. It was the principle of the development of the refurbishment of the cottage, or bringing it back into use as a cottage, because the starting point here was that the building was abandoned. It was not a dwelling per se. You couldn't move into it and live in it because it required extensive work, so it was abandoned. The use as a dwelling was permitted as part of the renovations, weighted against the retention of what was considered to be a non-designated heritage asset, and that was what weighed in the balance for that principle. It wasn't that the principle of development of a new dwelling or any dwelling in this location was acceptable. It was going from the retention of a heritage asset, which we can no longer do. With regard to the weight of the local plan, yes, we are short on the housing land supply. The starting point is always the plan. It doesn't get disregarded completely just because we're in a paragraph 11 situation, but equally the main point here is the sustainability. It's the presumption in favour of sustainable development, and this is not in a sustainable location. So the starting point really isn't correct. What we're looking at is what is the harm versus the housing need versus is it sustainable location.
Thank you for that. I'll open it up for questions. Councillor Burr.
Hi, apologies for my late arrival. I get that there's an existing house on the site, albeit abandoned, that the planning authority had no issue with the house being extensively rebuilt because of the heritage issues. I'm understanding that during the preliminary works to prepare the site, the main wall of the building that was to be retained had to come down, and that was based on advice. And that as a result, the planning officers now believe that there's no good reason why the house should go ahead at all, because there's now no heritage value in continuing. So I do get all of that. I have two questions really. Would approval set any precedent, or are the circumstances of you know, finding a problem with a wall that was unsafe during the construction be enough of a special circumstances for it not to be a precedent? And the second question is, the applicant mentioned that the cottage was not for sale but for use for farm workers or locals, and I know that in the past we have granted permission for houses to be built that are specifically for farm workers and locals in areas where we wouldn't normally grant permission. So I'm asking, is this part of a condition of this particular provision and this permission? And if it's not, could it be?
Sorry, Ash, do you want to respond to those?
So regarding the occupancy condition, the policy that was originally used to support the refurbishment of this building does actually require that it's for local occupancy. However, for a reason I haven't yet ascertained, it wasn't included on that decision notice. Whether that was an error or by agreement at the time for some reason, I don't know, it wasn't included. It has been discussed at some point in the planning history as to whether one would be accepted again as kind of a weighing in the balance. And certainly if this were to be approved, we would have to apply a certain number of conditions, which obviously haven't been put forward as the recommendation is for refusal. So we would have to come up with a suite of conditions if it was to be approved, and one of which I think probably would be recommended if it was to be acceptable to the applicant, that it be for local occupancy to reflect that original position. And apologies, could you just reiterate the first question? So that's a difficult topic. Technically, there's no precedent in planning. Each case is considered on its own merits. However, you do also have to be consistent in your decision making. So this one is slightly difficult because it's the principle of sustainable development. It's a core principle. It doesn't necessarily set a precedent that you would have to follow, but there could be criticism about inconsistency if you were to allow one and then the next one that comes in was to be refused. If this had remained delegated, we would have proceeded with a refusal on the basis that that is how it would be policy led.
Anyone else? Councillor Baker.
So sort of following on from that, could a condition be made that it's not a holiday home and that it is a permanent, you understand what I'm trying to say? So it is actually going to be occupied as opposed to being a holiday home or a temporary residence?
I think if we were to put an occupancy condition on that said it was, I think the standard occupancy condition for this area is a local one. There must be a local tie that would automatically preclude it to be used as a holiday let, because it could only be occupied by someone. So unless it was a local person coming on their holidays, I think we could write it in a way that it would just be for the general population as housing. Yeah.
Can I ask, picking up on those elements, is it more advantageous to have a local needs occupancy rather than an agricultural condition which restricts it to agriculture?
I would recommend the local needs one, and there's no agricultural argument put forward in this case. So unless they were looking for a particular agricultural workers dwelling, it would be the local needs occupancy condition that we'd look at here.
I'm not familiar with. I'm familiar with agriculture needs. Could we have a definition of what local needs means, please? Sorry.
There is a definition of that. We're just pulling it up, and I know it's not something that the Hambleton side of have this in their policy. It is a policy in what was Rydale's policy.
So whilst I can't see the actual text of a definition for the local needs occupancy condition, generally speaking, the way we would approach it is there would be a list of parishes that would be considered to be the area that it applies to. I could get the wording for you. I mean, if you were minded to approve this, we would need to look at these conditions anyway, so we could confirm it for you later. But it would say, it would refer to a definition that would outline who would be eligible to live in these properties.
Microphone, please, Councillor Baker.
Be somebody from, say, Whitby, or it would be within a certain radius of the property.
My turn. To a Rydale plan, I would imagine that it would relate to the Rydale area.
If memory serves, it's area and association with the area. I think you have to have a firm association with the area. I can't remember it all off the top of my head.
So the local needs occupancy have permanently resided in the parish or an adjoining parish, including those outside the district, for at least 3 years and are now in need of new accommodation which cannot be met from the existing housing stock. Do not live in the parish but have a long-standing connection in the local community, including previous residents of over 3 years, taking up full-time employment in the area, or have an essential need arising from major infirmity to move to be near relatives who are permanently resident within the district.
Right, sorry. That's very off-putting. I don't know what it is. I'm not sure what that is, but it's very off-putting. I'm going to open it up for debate. Councillor Burr.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to speak on this because before the boundary changes, this was part of my division, so I know this area very well. And first of all, what I'd like to say is that I'm really pleased that it's actually come to committee where we can have a sensible debate and discussion about this particular area. I'm not quite sure why it's down for refusal, but I do take our officers' comments on board. However, we all know that we have got acute need for dwellings in this area. And my principle about development is there a need? And especially if there was a dwelling on site, that really does need to be taken into consideration. I do believe that this new development with reclaimed or reused materials is in line of what would be required. As a keen observer of renovations and new builds, renovations are hugely difficult, they're hugely unsafe, and they are hugely complex. And unless you're in that building industry, it's hard to really grasp that. I won't mention the huge incurred costs, as this isn't relevant in this planning application. But having said that, if this application had come to me and for this committee to support as a new build with the salvage goods, I would be definitely approving it. With that said, I really don't like going against our officers' recommendations, but this is where I think committees are here to discuss and debate and put their local views forward. So I personally would like to see this site developed. I would like the local discussions that have been had to be listened to, because it is wanted, obviously, within that area. There's no doubt that there's not hordes of people coming here saying we do not want this. It's quite the opposite. They do want it. I also think that because materials are going to be reused, that's a good merit of how we can get the best of both worlds. So what I would like to do, and I've got no idea if I've got a seconder, is to move approval. I do not want a farm workers occupancy on this because I don't think it's relevant, but I do want a local occupational needs condition putting on it. That is if I have got a seconder. So that is my proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Apton.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So I suppose where I start on this is, I do agree with the officers in their assessment of what has happened. I mean, the officers have to go by policy, and it's quite clear to me that in these circumstances, all they could do was recommend refusal because the sort of the right to develop a property on that site has been lost, and that's why it's been called in. So I completely agree with the officer's assessment. No criticism of their approach to this whatsoever. However, then we have to listen to Bob and Steve and the applicant in the reasons why they believe it should be supported. So I think Steve said something important, and that was common sense. And that is something an officer can't apply. An officer has to apply the policy, and the officers have to apply the policy. And the policy may not always align with common sense. That's the nature of policies. So I respect the officers in their role of what they have to do. The gift of us as lay people in this process is that we can agree to step outside that policy. This committee can say this is an exceptional circumstance, and we can step outside the policy. And I believe in this case there is an exceptional circumstance, and that, as Steve said, we should apply common sense. So I would wholeheartedly second Councillor Burr's proposal, including the local occupancy clause. That's fundamental to this and fundamental to what the applicant said. So thank you very much, Chairman.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is one of these cases I perhaps wish we'd had a site visit. I've sort of looked at Street View and sort of I can see it's quite a remote place. I agree with the two previous speakers that the officers have worked within the policy for their recommendation. What I am concerned about is if we accept the officer's recommendation, what will happen to the site? You know, it doesn't look a very big site. Whether someone else will come up with another development that might not be as in keeping with what we would want. And so I do worry that this site could just fall into disrepair and become a problem. So I think I probably agree with the two previous speakers that we need to look at this with common sense rather than applying the policy.
Councillor White.
Thank you. My starting point is that generally we should refuse permission for individual dwellings and in hamlets because they are not sustainable. And they only make very modest, can only ever make very modest impact on housing supply. However, this particular circumstance feels like the events have worked against the developer. There's no evidence that they've acted in anything other than good faith. there's clear evidence of support from the local parish council, and subject to being able to get a local occupancy clause, which we'd normally do for any exceptional one-off buildings in this sort of area, I would be minded to approve planning permission. So I'm agreeing with the previous 3 speakers.
Councillor Andrew.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly with both what the committee are alluding to, and you know, I take into account the officers applying the policy, but common sense, and I will be approving.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think we're in a situation where it was always going to be a balanced judgment, and the balance is that the officers must work within the policy that they are given, and they have no opportunity to set that policy aside because we don't give them that opportunity. It has to come to committee. I absolutely fully accept that the previous permission was based on bringing back a redundant building. But for all the different reasons that have happened, that hasn't been possible. So, like my colleagues, I think there is an element of common sense, and my feeling is that, you know, the committee is going to apply that common sense very rationally. So, on that basis, it has been moved and seconded for approval. Please, can we?
Minded to decision.
It's a minded to decision, minded to approve, because we've got conditions that we've got to work through. Is there anything you want to add at this point, Ash?
No, thank you.
So it is the minded to approve because we've got to go through conditions, and one of those conditions will of course be the local needs occupancy clause. Yes.
It's minded to approve, and it's about conditions, and the applicant and the officers work something out that they all agree to. It doesn't have to come back to us, does it?
No, I don't believe it does. I think it's delegated to the head of planning.
Yes,
in conjunction with the chair.
Conjunction with
Yeah, so it's between Ash and I to sort that out. If members are happy with that. Okay. So it's been moved and seconded to minded to approve, subject to conditions, which we will work out between us. Is that all right? Can we please go to the vote? Thank you, members. That's unanimous. Just before I close the meeting, sorry, members don't have to have been present at the previous meeting to approve the minutes. So are you all comfortable to approve the minutes that we've put forward? Can I just get a show of hands? You, Councillor Burrs abstaining and 5-4. Thank you very much. Right, at that point, I'll pick it up again with Martin Granger.